The snow began to fracture before the sky changed. Across the frozen plains beyond Asgard, cracks spread through the ice without storm or tremor. Ravens abandoned their perches. Wolves howled without prey in sight. The gods felt it before they spoke of it. Something within their own walls was growing beyond proportion, not in rage, not in chaos, in silence, and silence, when it expands without resistance, unsettles even those who rule the skies. The stone itself had been set in the center of a fractured court, not as decoration but as challenge. Carved into its base were words few bothered to read anymore. Only the rightful king may draw the blade. Once, crowds had gathered in anticipation. Now they gathered for spectacle. Knights in polished armor stepped forward out of pride, not conviction. One by one they pulled. Metal did not shift. Laughter followed. Legitimacy had become theater. Power was taken elsewhere. Behind the spectacle stood men who already ruled by force. They did not need prophecy. They commanded armies. They collected tribute. They enforced loyalty with steel and fire. To them, the sword was relic, a political inconvenience left from a dead king's myth. One lord gripped the hilt and pulled with visible strain, veins rising along his neck. The blade did not move. He spat at the stone and rode away, preferring conquest over legitimacy. The crowd dispersed again. Merchants resumed bargaining beside the square, as if nothing sacred had been tested. Children threw stones at the base when guards were not looking. Rain pooled along the fuller of the blade and slid downward in thin lines. Above, banners bearing rival crests snapped in opposing winds. England was no longer a kingdom. It was territory carved into pieces by men who trusted strength more than order. And the sword remained fixed, indifferent to urgency. The tournament was announced not to honor prophecy, but to display dominance. Lords gathered with their banners and armored retainers, each eager to measure rivals in open field. The sword in the stone stood at the edge of the lists, half forgotten beside spectacle. Steel clashed, horses thundered, crowds roared for blood and coin. Between bouts, knights approached the blade again, more for amusement than belief. It did not yield. The realm burned slowly while pride competed loudly. Our young squire moved between tents carrying armor not his own. He listened more than he spoke. He polished blades he would never claim, tightened straps for men who mocked him, and watched how lords commanded fear rather than respect. When one knight discovered his sword missing before a bout, the squire searched for a replacement without permission. The field roared for the next contest. He turned toward the square, where the forgotten blade stood in stone. He did not approach the stone as a contender. He approached it because he needed a blade. The crowd's focus remained on the tournament field, where armor clashed and reputations were wagered. The squire wiped rain from the hilt and gripped it without ceremony. He expected weight. He expected resistance. He pulled with steady pressure. The sword slid free in one smooth motion. The sound of steel leaving stone cut through the noise of the field. Conversations stopped. For a heartbeat, the tournament continued as if nothing had changed. Then someone saw the empty stone. The cry carried across the field faster than a trumpet call. The squire stood alone, blade in hand, rain running down his sleeves. The steel did not gleam unnaturally, but the air around it seemed sharper, clearer. A lord dismounted and demanded it returned. The young man turned, calm. He offered no speech. He simply held the sword as if it had always belonged there. They tried to take it from him, not ceremonially, forcefully. A knight seized the hilt and pulled with both hands. The blade did not shift. Another tried, anger rising faster than reason. Nothing. The squire stepped back and extended it again, inviting any challenger forward. None could draw it from his grip. Murmurs hardened into accusation. Fraud, sorcery, theft. He said nothing. He did not clutch the weapon defensively. He simply held it with steady composure. A blade was raised against him before judgment was spoken. Steel flashed toward his shoulder. He moved without panic, turning his wrist and lifting the drawn sword in a single, precise motion. The strike was deflected cleanly, not wildly, not desperately. The counter came measured and direct, forcing the attacker backward without cutting deep. Gasps replaced outrage. This was no trick of leverage. This was control under pressure, and control commands attention faster than lineage. The lord who had first mocked the stone now stepped forward with visible restraint, calculating rather than raging. He ordered space cleared. If the boy claimed legitimacy, he would prove it in open combat. The squire did not refuse. Armor was offered to him as insult, as though protection might equal status. He declined most of it. He chose balance over display. When they circled, the difference was immediate. One fought for pride, the other fought for outcome. The lord attacked first with brute certainty, swinging wide to end the spectacle quickly. The young man did not retreat in panic. He stepped inside the arc, redirecting force rather than opposing it. Mud shifted underfoot. Steel rang in tight exchanges. The blade in his hand felt precise, responsive, as if it required discipline more than strength. When the lord overcommitted, the squire turned his weight and drove him to the ground. The strike stopped short of the throat. He chose restraint. The field did not erupt. It narrowed. Nobles leaned toward one another, calculating risk instead of applauding skill. The defeated lord rose with mud across polished steel, pride wounded more deeply than flesh. The young man lowered the blade and stepped back without triumph. He did not press advantage. He did not demand recognition. He waited. That patience unsettled them more than victory would have. Ambition lunges. Authority stands still and allows others to move first. Merlin had not spoken during the contest. He watched from beneath a weathered hood, eyes fixed not on the strike, but on the restraint that followed it. When the murmurs swelled toward outrage, he stepped forward at last. Not to praise, to confirm. He asked the young man to return the blade to the stone. Before all of them, the squire walked calmly to the pedestal. He set the tip against the seam and released his grip. The sword sank back into place without resistance. The murmur shifted from accusation to unease. Merlin did not address the crowd as prophet. He spoke as witness. He asked the young man to draw the blade again, slowly, deliberately. No force. The squire gripped the hilt once more and pulled. Steel slid free with the same measured ease. There was no strain in his arms, no spectacle, only alignment. For the first time, the nobles saw what they had refused to consider. Legitimacy had not vanished. It had waited. They demanded a name, not from curiosity but from threat. The young man answered without embellishment. Arthur, no lineage claimed, no boast attached. The simplicity unsettled them more than any title could have. A lord laughed and called him unworthy of command. Arthur did not argue. He raised the blade and drove it cleanly through a war banner planted in the mud. The pole split in two. The fabric fell. "Then test me," he said, voice steady. Silence followed. The challenges came one after another, ordered rather than chaotic. Knights stepped forward, determined to disprove what they had witnessed. Arthur did not rush. He measured distance and timing, letting each attacker commit before countering. Mud shifted under boots, as shields splintered from controlled strikes. He disarmed without slaughter, forcing men back instead of cutting them down. This was not ambition seeking applause. It was discipline under pressure, and discipline alters allegiance. When the final challenger fell back, breathing hard and uninjured but defeated, the field no longer roared. It evaluated. Lords who had ruled by intimidation now faced something they could not easily dismiss. Arthur stood with the blade lowered, rain darkening his hair and armor borrowed for the contest. He did not smile. He did not demand kneeling. He waited for decision. That composure forced their hand. Power claimed through restraint leaves fewer openings for denial. Recognition did not arrive as applause. It came through resistance. Lords demanded proof, delay, compromise. Some hoped doubt would fracture momentum. Merlin spoke of lineage long hidden, but Arthur did not rely on blood alone. He understood a divided realm would not unite under ancestry. It would unite under order. He did not demand kneeling. He demanded discipline, stability over pride. That shift reframed the moment. Legitimacy was no longer symbolic, it was strategic. The first oaths were reluctant. Hands rested on sword pommels rather than extended in loyalty. Arthur did not rush ceremony. He met each lord's gaze without hostility, offering terms instead of threats. Unified levies, shared defense, equal seat at a council built on accountability, not submission. Structure. Some agreed out of calculation, others out of exhaustion. None bowed easily. That was acceptable. Order imposed too quickly fractures. Order negotiated can endure. The council was formed before the crown was set. Arthur insisted on structure first, symbolism later. A round table was commissioned, not for legend, but for leverage. No seat elevated, no lord placed at the head. Equality under oath prevented rivalry from festering unseen. Some saw wisdom, others saw vulnerability. Arthur understood the risk. Unity built on fear collapses in fear. Unity built on shared stake resists fracture. The table became foundation before the throne existed. Rebellion did not fade at once. Border lords tested the new order with raids and delayed tribute. Arthur answered with precision, not spectacle. Levies advanced in coordinated ranks. Supply routes were secured before confrontation began. He rode at the front, not behind heraldry. Engagements ended quickly because they were prepared. Victory followed planning, not pride. Word spread that this king calculated before striking and stood beside his men. Reputation began replacing doubt. Camelot rose not as ornament, but as declaration. Stone walls expanded under relentless labor, towers positioned to command the valleys beyond. Arthur walked the foundations before they were sealed, questioning builders as carefully as captains. Fortification meant permanence. Markets reopened inside guarded gates. Trade returned under patrol. Stability began attracting loyalty faster than conquest ever had. Order, once visible, becomes harder to resist. With walls rising, rival banners began lowering. Not from fear alone, but from calculation. Arthur offered former enemies command within structured ranks rather than exile. Those who accepted kept land under oath. Those who refused found supply lines cut before blades crossed. He avoided unnecessary slaughter. Dead men inspire revenge. Integrated men strengthen systems. The realm began shifting from scattered strongholds to coordinated authority under a single standard. Peace did not soften him. It sharpened him. Arthur reviewed unrest personally instead of delegating blindly. He removed knights who abused power, even when they had fought beside him. Loyalty without discipline weakens structure. Some called him rigid, others called him cold. He accepted both. Order does not survive on affection. It survives on standards enforced without hesitation. Stability was not gifted to Camelot. It was maintained. Strength attracted talent as quickly as it attracted envy. Knights of proven skill rode to Camelot seeking place at the round table. Arthur did not accept all. He tested more than swordsmanship. He watched how they treated servants, how they spoke of defeated enemies, how they held silence when insulted. A kingdom falls from within long before it is conquered from outside. Selection became strategy. The table was not a reward. It was a responsibility. Among those who proved worthy stood a knight whose skill rivaled Arthur's own. Lancelot did not boast. He won decisively and spoke little afterward. In battle, he moved with controlled aggression, reading openings before others saw them. Arthur valued him not for loyalty declared, but for discipline demonstrated. Victories multiplied under their combined command. Borders stabilized further. But admiration, when left unchecked, can evolve into something less strategic and more dangerous. Guinevere strengthened the throne in ways banners never could. She understood diplomacy as leverage, aligning houses through negotiation instead of steel. Arthur trusted her judgment in council and court. Stability deepened under shared rule. Long campaigns kept Arthur at the frontier, while Camelot grew under her presence and Lancelot's protection. Respect became familiarity. Familiarity blurred boundaries meant to remain intact, not through betrayal, through proximity and silence. Rumors rarely begin loud. They surface in fragments, in altered glances and shortened conversations. Arthur noticed changes in cadence before he heard accusations. Lancelot avoided eye contact longer than necessary. Guinevere spoke carefully when campaigns were discussed. No evidence stood before him, only pattern. A weaker ruler would have reacted immediately, publicly. Arthur did not. He chose to observe. A kingdom destabilized by scandal collapses faster than one challenged by open war. The confirmation did not arrive as confession. It arrived as certainty. A messenger intercepted, a private meeting misjudged. Arthur stood alone with knowledge that could fracture everything he had built. He did not draw steel. He did not rage. He measured consequence. Exposing the truth would divide the table. Ignoring it would corrode trust. War outside the walls was manageable. War within them was existential. He chose delay, believing control could still be preserved. Delay did not erase the fracture. It widened it. Mordred, watchful and patient, recognized weakness where others saw discretion. He spoke quietly to dissatisfied lords, framing restraint as indecision. Loyalty, once solid, began thinning at the edges. Arthur sensed the shift, but understood that acting too soon would validate suspicion. Acting too late would concede momentum. Strategy against armies was predictable. Strategy against ambition required precision, and precision demands time. Mordred moved carefully, never openly defiant. He gathered influence through suggestion rather than accusation, presenting himself as defender of moral clarity. To some, Arthur's silence became compromise. To others, it became weakness. The Round Table no longer felt equal. It felt divided. Arthur called private councils, reinforcing discipline, reaffirming structure. But doubt, once seeded, spreads faster than decree. The threat was no longer at the border. It sat inside the hall. When confrontation finally came, it did not erupt in chaos. It surfaced in formal accusation. Mordred demanded judgment be passed publicly. He framed his challenge as defense of honor, not rebellion. The court divided in silence. Arthur listened without interruption. He knew any verdict would fracture allegiance, punish and risk civil war, forgive and confirm weakness. He chose neither immediately. He chose preparation. If conflict was inevitable, it would not catch him unready. Lancelot did not wait for verdict. He rode from Camelot before judgment could be enforced, taking loyal knights with him. That flight confirmed what denial had delayed. Arthur did not pursue in rage. He fortified first. Supply lines were secured, garrisons repositioned. Mordred declared open defiance soon after, claiming Arthur had lost moral authority. The fracture became visible at last. The kingdom Arthur had unified now faced division, not from invasion, but from within. Banners once united now faced each other across open ground. Arthur gathered his forces without spectacle. Commands moved through disciplined ranks, not through rage. Civil war destroys more than land. It fractures belief. Mordred's army was smaller, but sharpened by accusation. Arthur's strength rested in structure and loyalty earned over years. This would not be a swift correction. It would be a deliberate campaign to reclaim authority without collapsing the realm. The first clashes were measured, not chaotic. Arthur struck supply lines before engaging main forces, cutting momentum before confrontation. He avoided reckless charges, choosing terrain that favored discipline over fury. Some victories were decisive, others cost men he had knighted himself. Each report tightened the strain across the realm. This was no longer about betrayal alone. It was about whether the order he built could withstand fracture from within. Mordred adapted quickly. He abandoned fixed positions and turned to disruption, striking roads and isolated garrisons to exhaust Arthur's reach. Villages once loyal began hesitating, uncertain which banner would endure. Arthur reinforced patrol networks, expanding presence instead of chasing spectacle. He knew endurance would decide more than a single clash, but prolonged conflict erodes morale. Even disciplined ranks question cost when resolution feels distant and unity grows thin. Winter approached before either side secured advantage. Supplies tightened, horses weakened, armor required constant repair. Arthur refused reckless advance despite demands for a decisive clash. He preserved core strength while allowing Mordred's forces to stretch across contested ground. Patience drew criticism. Some knights urged immediate confrontation. Arthur calculated differently. A rushed victory risks collapse. A controlled war protects what remains worth ruling. At Camelot, resolution could no longer be delayed. Both armies formed under cold light, banners torn but unlowered. Arthur positioned veterans at the center, anchoring the line with discipline instead of fury. Mordred stood opposite, armored and unwavering, no longer subtle in ambition. There would be no maneuver left after this, only outcome. Arthur knew that even victory here would not restore what had fractured. Some losses cannot be reversed. They can only be survived. The charge began without trumpet or spectacle. Steel met steel in compressed lines where training outweighed rage. Arthur fought at the front, not for glory, but for cohesion. Wherever he advanced, his men steadied. Mordred cut through resistance with equal force, driving toward the center with deliberate intent. The field narrowed around them as formations collapsed. This battle would not be decided by numbers. It would be decided by proximity. Through fractured ranks and fallen banners, Arthur saw him. Mordred advanced with controlled precision, not reckless fury. The battlefield thinned around them as if instinctively conceding space. Knights who once shared a table now clashed without hesitation. This was no longer civil war. It was inheritance contested by steel. Arthur adjusted stance, measuring distance and timing. Strategy ends when confrontation becomes personal. What remained now was consequence. Their first exchange was clean and violent. Steel collided with force that carried years of unspoken conflict. Arthur did not overextend. Mordred did not retreat. Each tested the other's guard, searching for weakness rather than spectacle. Around them, the battle blurred into distant noise. This duel was not about territory. It was about legitimacy. Every strike carried more than weight. It carried judgment, and judgment cannot be postponed forever. Mordred shifted first, abandoning defense for decisive force. His blade drove forward with intent to end, not wound. Arthur absorbed the strike across his guard, feeling impact travel through bone. He countered with precision, not rage, redirecting momentum instead of matching it. Blood marked the ground between them. Neither stepped back. There was no retreat left in this equation. Authority, once fractured, demands a final settlement. The final exchange came without flourish. Mordred lunged, committing fully to a strike meant to decide the realm in one motion. Arthur stepped inside the arc, accepting impact to deliver his own. Steel entered armor at close range. Both men felt it. Mordred fell first, disbelief fading into stillness. Arthur remained standing only a moment longer. Victory and cost arrived together. The field quieted, unsure whether it had been saved or ended. Arthur did not collapse immediately. He steadied himself against a broken shield planted in the earth. Around him, surviving knights hesitated between pursuit and disbelief. Mordred's banner lay torn in the mud. The rebellion had ended, but silence felt heavier than triumph. Blood darkened Arthur's armor beneath the dented crest. He understood the wound was not survivable. Order had been defended, but permanence was no longer guaranteed. Across the realms, omens aligned in rapid succession. Wolves howled in unison across distant forests. The sea withdrew from its shores without storm. Ravens abandoned the towers of Asgard entirely. Odin no longer sought interpretation. He recognized sequence when he saw it. This was not revolt. It was fulfillment approaching threshold. The creature's breathing deepened, not from exhaustion, but from preparation. The ribbon held. But holding is not the same as enduring eternity. He asked for Excalibur to be returned to the water from which it came, not as surrender but as closure. The blade had validated him when the realm was fractured. It would not be claimed by ambition after him. A trusted knight hesitated at the shoreline, unwilling to release such power. Arthur insisted. Symbols must not outlive their purpose. The sword was cast into the mist. The surface broke once, then stilled. Authority returned to legend. They carried him from the field as dusk swallowed the horizon. No anthem marked the passage, only measured silence. The men who once doubted him now moved with careful reverence. Camelot's walls stood intact in the distance, yet something foundational had shifted. A kingdom can survive invasion. It struggles to survive the loss of its axis. Arthur did not speak of regret. He spoke of continuity. Order must endure beyond the man who enforced it. Before dawn, word had already begun to travel. Some claimed he would return when the realm required him. Others insisted he had merely been taken to recover beyond mortal reach. Arthur did not encourage myth. He accepted consequence. Yet legend forms fastest when certainty fades. Camelot would remember him not only for victory, but for restraint, for discipline, for choosing structure over spectacle when it mattered most. That memory would shape what followed. The throne did not remain empty long, but it never felt the same. Successors inherited walls, systems, alliances. They did not inherit presence. The Round Table endured, though its equality shifted under new ambitions. Arthur's campaigns were recorded in measured script, stripped of hesitation and internal fracture. History prefers clarity. Reality had been more complex. The realm stabilized, yet an absence lingered where decisive restraint once stood. In years that followed, bards simplified what soldiers had witnessed. They sang of destiny, not doubt, of purity, not political fracture. Arthur became symbol before he became memory. The field at Camelot turned into a single heroic moment, not a culmination of compromise and restraint. This transformation was not malicious. It was protective. Legends stabilize cultures when details threaten cohesion. Complexity was archived. Certainty was amplified. The sword in the stone became origin. The lake became conclusion. Between those points, conflict compressed into narrative efficiency. Arthur was recast as inevitable rather than strategic. His patience vanished from retelling. His hesitation was erased. The civil fracture became necessary trial instead of preventable fracture. Myth reorganized events to protect belief, but systems are not sustained by destiny. They are sustained by discipline. That distinction quietly faded. Camelot shifted from capital to ideal. Artists painted symmetry where tension once lived. The Round Table became moral emblem rather than political instrument. Lancelot's fracture softened into romantic tragedy. Mordred's ambition hardened into simple villainy. The nuance that once demanded difficult judgment disappeared. Simplification made the story stronger for listeners, weaker for understanding. Arthur's greatest achievement had been balance. Balance rarely survives retelling. Over time, Arthur ceased to be a ruler and became a promise. When kingdoms faltered, his name resurfaced as assurance that order could return, not because he was flawless, but because he had acted when fracture threatened collapse. The legend offered comfort without revisiting cost. His wounds faded from memory. His restraint became mythic virtue rather than strategic necessity. Hope proved easier to preserve than context, and hope travels farther than accuracy. Generations invoked him during unrest, speaking of a king who would rise again when chaos reached its peak. The prophecy endured because it required no accountability. If stability failed, it meant the hour had not yet come. Arthur transformed from historical force into deferred solution. The burden shifted from citizens to myth, yet no returning figure can replace institutions once neglected. His legend endured. His discipline required effort. Scholars debated whether he had been singular or shaped by circumstance. Records remained incomplete, preserved unevenly across monasteries and courts. What survived confirmed campaigns, alliances, structural reform. What faded were the private calculations and controlled silences. Arthur's strength had never been spectacle. It had been restraint applied at decisive moments. That quality resists romantic exaggeration. It functions best when observed quietly, not celebrated loudly. Fenrir shifted tactics. He lowered his frame, forcing Odin to descend from height and abandon distance. Sleipnir stumbled as the ground beneath split wider under accumulated strain. Odin dismounted without hesitation, spear rotating in practiced arcs. He struck again, driving steel into muscle already torn. Fenrir absorbed it and closed the remaining space. His jaws snapped around the shaft, splintering it near the point. Wood shattered, metal bent. The advantage of reach disappeared. Camelot's stones eventually weathered. Borders shifted. Successors altered laws and alliances. The system Arthur built evolved beyond recognition, yet the framework of shared counsel and structured authority persisted in fragments across realms. His presence did not. Influence often survives in architecture rather than memory. People remembered the sword. They forgot the table, but the table had stabilized what the sword alone never could. That was the quieter legacy. In the end, what endured was not certainty of return, but evidence of governance. Arthur had unified through merit, held through discipline, and ended without spectacle. The fracture that destroyed him did not erase what he structured. It tested it. Kingdoms rarely fall from a single blow. They erode when standards weaken. His life demonstrated the inverse. Stability is not inherited. It is enforced, defended, and sometimes paid for personally. There was no final proclamation, no divine confirmation, only a kingdom adjusting to absence. Camelot continued. The council convened. Patrols rode. Markets opened. Systems outlived the man who designed them. That was the proof of his reign, not immortality, continuity. Arthur did not return to rule again. He remained where legend placed him. But the structure he enforced endured long enough to outlast myth. That was the true measure of a king. Generations later, when disorder resurfaced, leaders invoked his name as standard rather than savior. They studied his reforms more than his battles. The Round Table resurfaced in varied forms across councils, seeking balance without hierarchy. Few recognized the origin. Fewer understood the discipline required to sustain it. Arthur's greatest lesson was not victory at Camelot. It was the insistence that legitimacy must be proven repeatedly, not assumed. That principle survived him. His story settled into dual existence. One version promised return when darkness peaked. The other documented the cost of fractured loyalty and delayed confrontation. Both circulated. Only one required effort to understand. Arthur had not ruled by prophecy. He ruled by preparation, restraint and decisive action when delay expired. The realm endured because systems were built before crisis struck. That architecture, not legend, defined his impact. In quiet archives, scribes recorded the campaigns without embellishment. Supply routes mapped, alliances formalized, garrisons reinforced. These entries lacked drama, yet revealed foundation. Arthur's reign was not sustained by miracle, but by repeated correction of imbalance. When rivals tested borders, he responded. When allies faltered, he recalibrated. Governance accumulates through discipline. The legend remembers the sword. The record remembers the structure. The prophecy of return persisted because it relieved responsibility. If the king would rise again, present leaders could postpone reform. Arthur had done the opposite. He confronted fracture when it was visible, not when it was convenient. That distinction separated ruler from myth. Camelot endured because he acted before collapse was total. Waiting for destiny invites decay. Acting within constraint preserves continuity. His example remained available. Few chose to apply it. In time, historians separated admiration from analysis. They found a ruler neither flawless nor fragile, but deliberate. Arthur advanced when advantage was clear and withdrew when preservation mattered more than pride. His civil fracture did not erase his structural success. It revealed the cost of delayed confrontation. Authority, once tested internally, must resolve decisively or dissolve. He resolved it, even at personal expense. That decision defined the realm more than any coronation. What remained was example. A leader validated by merit, strengthened through reform and concluded by consequence. Arthur did not escape cost. He absorbed it. That is why the legend endured. not because he ruled forever, but because he did not collapse when fracture became unavoidable. Stability demands sacrifice at decisive moments. Many desire authority, few accept its price. His reign clarified that difference without proclamation. Long after banners changed and borders shifted, his framework resurfaced in councils that valued balance over dominance. The Round Table became template, even when unnamed. Arthur's lesson endured quietly. Power shared within structure strengthens more than power hoarded in fear. Yet structure requires constant maintenance. When vigilance fades, fracture returns. His life demonstrated both the rise and the cost of defending order against internal ambition. That duality defines lasting rule. The image of the young squire drawing steel from stone remains the most repeated scene. It suggests inevitability, but inevitability did not secure the realm. Governance did. Arthur's legacy was not the miracle that began his rise. It was the discipline that sustained it through fracture and war. Legends prefer origins. History measures endurance. He provided both. Only one required constant effort to preserve. That effort defined the kingdom. When people speak of his return, they speak of rescue. They imagine a king who will rise when disorder peaks. Yet his true return would not come as apparition. It would come as reform, restraint, and structured authority restored by those willing to act. Arthur does not need to wake from legend. His principles remain accessible. The question is not whether he will rise again. It is whether discipline will. No crown remains untouched by erosion. No structure survives without vigilance. Arthur's reign did not eliminate fracture, it managed it. He unified through merit, governed through reform, and ended through consequence. Camelot endured because systems were built before crisis peaked. That is the final measure. Not immortality, not prophecy. Continuity under pressure. The legend promises return. The record demands responsibility. Only one sustains a kingdom.